Alexander Whitmore, a billionaire CEO who judges people by their achievements, lunches at a chic cafe where Emma Collins, a barista and brilliant student, struggles to pay for her education. Alexander never notices her, until one day he sees her counting change and choosing a philosophy book over lunch. Intrigued, he observes her. He discovers she often skips meals to buy books or study materials, or to volunteer at a literacy program in a low-income community. Alexander is fascinated by Emma's sacrifice and passion for knowledge, seeing in her someone who values education for reasons very different from his own. But before we reveal what happens, if you are also moved by stories like this, click to subscribe now and help us bring more tales of courage and loyalty. Thank you. And now let's see what happened. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of warm pastries in the small neighborhood bakery in Greenwich Village, New York City. Emma Collins adjusted her navy blue apron for the 10th. Time that morning, her fingers trembling slightly as she arranged the croissants in the display case. At 22 years old, she already carried the weight of responsibilities that many only knew in adulthood. "Emma, table 4 needs more coffee," shouted Mr. Johnson, the owner of the bakery, from the kitchen. She nodded, grabbing the thermal carafe with a smile that had become automatic over the past 3 years working there. The young woman moved with a natural grace between the tables, greeting regular customers with genuine warmth. Her brown eyes sparkled with an intelligence that contrasted with the simplicity of the uniform she wore. Emma had the kind of understated beauty that revealed itself slowly. Delicate features, brown hair always tied back in a practical bun, and a smile that could brighten even the grayest of winter days in New York. What few knew was that every morning, before arriving at the bakery at 6 o'clock, Emma had already studied for 2 hours. She woke up at 4 in the morning in her small kitchenette in Chinatown, which she shared with a college roommate to afford the rent. The folding table by the window served as her desk, where she pored over books of literature and philosophy, making careful notes by the light of an old lamp she had bought at a thrift store. Emma was in her 4th semester of English literature at NYU, pursuing a dream that seemed impossible for a girl who grew up in the Bronx. Her mother, Mrs. Rodriguez, worked as a house cleaner, and her father had left when she was only 8 years old, leaving only empty promises and bills to pay. "Honey, education is the only thing that nobody can take away from you," Mrs. Rodriguez always said, while counting and recounting the coins at the end of the month. It was these words that echoed in Emma's mind every time she thought of giving up. The day at the bakery followed its usual rhythm until around 11 in the morning, a different customer caught her attention. Alexander Whitmore was the kind of man who commanded respect just by the way he entered a room. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an impeccably tailored suit, he stood out among the regular patrons of the bakery. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and he carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Emma's monthly salary. "A double espresso, no sugar, and an almond croissant," he ordered, without looking up from his phone. His voice was firm, accustomed to being obeyed immediately. Emma served him with the same courtesy she extended to all customers, but noticed how he barely registered her presence. To Alexander, she was just another employee doing her job. He took the coffee, left the exact change on the counter, and left, already discussing something on the phone about acquisitions and market valuations. In the following days, Alexander became a constant, always at the same time, always the same order, always the same polite indifference. Emma began to think of him as the executive, mentally categorizing him as just another wealthy customer, who saw people like her only as service providers. What Emma didn't know was that Alexander Whitmore was the CEO of EduTech Solutions, an educational technology company valued at billions of dollars. Raised in a family of successful entrepreneurs, On the Upper East Side, he had been educated at the best private schools and universities abroad. For Alexander, the world was divided between winners and losers, between those who seized opportunities and those who only did the bare minimum. Emma's true challenge revealed itself on weekends. While most of her college classmates took the opportunity to rest or have fun, she took 2 buses to get to the Bronx, where she volunteered teaching literacy to adults at the community center in the neighborhood. It was her way of giving back to the community that had helped her dream beyond what seemed possible. "Professor Emma, I managed to write my whole name," celebrated Mr. Thompson, a 60-year-old man who worked as a construction worker and had decided to learn to read so he could help his grandson with his homework. These moments made all the sacrifices worthwhile. Emma had developed an extraordinary ability to find joy in small victories, turning each obstacle into an opportunity to grow. When she couldn't buy all the books needed for classes, she frequented thrift stores and libraries. When the money for transportation was tight at the end of the month, she walked impossible distances, always carrying a book to make good use of the time. It was a typical Tuesday when everything changed. Emma was organizing the small bookshelf of used books that the bakery kept in a corner, an initiative of Mr. Johnson to raise funds for a local daycare center. Each book cost between $5 and $15, and Emma often spent long minutes there, leafing through works that she would like to have, but which did not fit into her tight budget. On that specific day, she had brought the last coins that remained in her wallet. $16.50. She had to choose. Have lunch or buy the contemporary philosophy book she had noticed the week before. Her fingers touched the worn cover of the book, and she felt that familiar pang in her stomach, not from physical hunger, but from a hunger for knowledge. The decision was quick. Emma took the book, carefully counted $8, and headed to the register. With the remaining dollars, she bought only a small coffee, the cheapest on the menu. One more meal that would be replaced by literature. One more day in which she would choose to feed her mind at the expense of her body. What Emma didn't realize was that someone was watching. Across the bakery, Alexander had witnessed the entire scene, and for the first time in a long time, something other than numbers and corporate strategies completely captured his attention. Alexander remained still for a few seconds, watching Emma head to a table in the corner of the bakery with her small coffee and newly acquired book. There was something about that scene that intrigued him deeply. In his 34 years of life, surrounded by people who constantly sought to impress him or gain advantages, he had rarely witnessed such a genuine act of personal sacrifice in the name of knowledge. In the following days, Alexander found himself arriving at the bakery a few minutes earlier, discreetly observing Emma's habits. She always brought a book during her breaks, making notes in the margins with a pen that had clearly been well used. Her expressions changed as she read, frowning in concentration, smiling slightly when something touched her, or pausing to reflect on more complex passages. A week after the book episode, Alexander decided to test his growing curiosity. He approached the counter during a less busy moment and, for the first time, really looked at Emma when he placed his order. "The usual, please," he said, but this time he remained there instead of walking away immediately. Emma looked up, slightly surprised by the change in the regular customer's behavior. "Of course, sir. One moment." As she prepared the coffee, Alexander noticed the book open next to the espresso machine, Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. The pages were filled with careful notes, colorful post-its marking important passages. "Interesting reading," he commented, nodding toward the book. Emma blushed slightly, quickly closing the book. "Sorry, I shouldn't be reading during work." "On the contrary," Alexander said, genuinely curious. "It's rare to find someone reading Freire for pleasure. Do you study education?" English literature, Emma replied hesitantly, but I work with adult literacy on weekends. Frere is essential for understanding how to transform lives through education. Alexander nodded slowly. There was something in the passion contained in Emma's voice that resonated with his own convictions about the power of education, although he had never experienced them so viscerally. "And what do you think of his approach to critical consciousness?" he asked, testing her knowledge. Emma's eyes lit up. "I think he understood something fundamental, that educating is not depositing knowledge, but creating possibilities for discovery. When I teach Mr. Thompson to write his own name, I'm not just teaching letters. I'm giving him back a piece of identity that the world has tried to take away." Alexander was impressed. It wasn't just the theoretical knowledge that Emma demonstrated, but the way she connected academic concepts with real experiences of human transformation. In his executive meetings, he rarely heard such profound insights about the true impact of education. "Have you worked here long?" he asked, genuinely interested for the first time in knowing the story of someone he considered just another employee. 3 years, Emma replied, nervously wiping the counter. "I pay for my college. Working here, it's a good place. Mr. Johnson is understanding about my class schedules." Alexander processed this information. In his world, college education was a guaranteed right, not a daily struggle. "And your parents? Can't they help with your studies?" Emma hesitated. "My mom does what she can. She works as a house cleaner and has always encouraged me to study. She says education is the only true inheritance she can leave me." Something changed in Alexander's gaze. For the first time, he was facing someone who valued education not as a privilege, but as an achievement. Not as an acquired right, but as a dream realized through genuine sacrifice. "Your coffee is ready," Emma said softly, interrupting his thoughts. Alexander took the cup, but didn't walk away. "Emma," he said, reading the name embroidered on her apron, "can I ask a personal question?" She nodded, although visibly nervous. "Why English literature? With your passion for education, why not education?" Emma smiled for the first time in the conversation, a genuine smile that completely transformed her face. "Because I believe that literature is the most powerful form of education. When I read Toni Morrison to my students, I'm not just teaching English. I'm showing that a black woman overcame many obstacles to become one of America's most important voices. I'm proving that origin doesn't determine destiny." Alexander was silent for a long moment. This 22-year-old had just articulated something that he, with all his privileged education and business experience, had never been able to express so clearly: the true transformative power of education. "I need to go," he said finally, but his voice carried an unprecedented gentleness. "Thank you for the coffee and for the conversation." As he headed to the door, Alexander stopped and turned around. "Emma, can I ask what your dream is after you graduate?" She didn't hesitate. "I want to open a community library in the Bronx, a place where children like I was can discover that there are worlds beyond what they can see from their window." Alexander nodded and left, but for the first time in years, his mind was not focused on spreadsheets or meetings. He was thinking about a young woman who chose books over lunch, who transformed philosophical concepts into concrete hope for a forgotten community. That night, in his penthouse apartment on the Upper West Side, Alexander found himself researching NYU scholarship programs, community libraries in low-income neighborhoods. For the first time in his career, he was considering using his resources not to generate more profit, but to generate real impact. Emma also couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. There was something in the executive's gaze that had surprised her, a genuine curiosity, an interest that went beyond superficial cordiality. For the first time, Someone from another world had really listened to her, and that awakened in her a strange sense of possibility. Neither of them knew that that 15-minute conversation had planted a seed that would completely change the course of their lives. In the days following the conversation, Alexander found himself doing something completely out of character, obsessively researching Emma Collins, not in an invasive way, but through legitimate channels that his position allowed him to access. He discovered that she was among the top 5 students in her program, with exceptional grades in all subjects, especially in American literature and philosophy of education. Even more impressive were the professor's accounts. Emma Collins is an exceptional student, the professor of literary theory had written. In a recommendation, she possesses a unique understanding of literature as a tool for social transformation, likely due to her practical experience with underserved communities. Alexander also discovered that Emma was in real danger of dropping out. Her tuition was overdue, and she had requested a special payment plan for the debt. According to academic records, she worked 40 hours a week to try to cover the costs, in addition to maintaining her volunteer activities. Meanwhile, Emma noticed a subtle change in Alexander's behavior. He continued to come to the bakery at the same time, but now he always found a way to start small conversations. He asked about the book she was reading, showed genuine curiosity about her volunteer work, and occasionally mentioned articles or research on education that he had read. "I saw an interesting study about community libraries yesterday," he commented one Thursday, while Emma was preparing his usual coffee, "about how they can significantly increase literacy rates in low-income communities." Emma stopped stirring the coffee, looking at him in surprise. "Have you been researching community libraries?" Alexander blushed slightly, a reaction he couldn't explain himself. "Let's just say our conversation made me think about some things. Your idea about opening a library in the Bronx, it's more than a romantic dream. It's a solid strategy for social impact." "You talk like you know what you're talking about," Emma observed, drying her hands on her apron. "I work in education," Alexander admitted vaguely. "Educational technology." Emma nodded, but didn't press for more details. She had learned not to ask too many questions about the lives of customers, especially those who clearly came from worlds very different from her own. The real turning point happened on a rainy Friday. Emma arrived at work visibly wet, her hair dripping despite the broken umbrella she carried. Alexander noticed that she was wearing shoes with soles that were seemingly punctured as they left small wet marks on the floor. During her lunch break, he discreetly watched her head to the used bookshelf. Emma stood for long minutes in front of a copy of The Power of Education by Paulo Freire, costing $12. She opened and closed her wallet several times, clearly doing mental calculations. Finally, Emma took the book and headed to the register. With the remaining money, she bought only a roll and a small coffee. Clearly, her lunch would be just that. Alexander made an impulsive decision. He got up and approached the bookshelf, pretending to look for something specific. When Emma returned to the counter, he called her over. "Emma, can I talk to you for a moment?" She approached, slightly nervous. Alexander rarely approached her directly. "I have a proposal for you," he began, choosing his words carefully. "My company is developing new educational programs, and we need someone with practical experience in community education to help us with research." Emma frowned. "What kind of research?" "Analysis of teaching methodologies for adults in low-income communities, interviews with educators, evaluation of teaching materials, that sort of thing. It would be a part-time job, which you could do in your free time." "I don't have experience in corporate research," Emma said hesitantly. "You have something more valuable, real experience," Alexander replied. "You know these communities inside and out. You know what works and what doesn't work in practice, not just in theory. Emma remained silent, processing the offer. The payment would be $2,000 per month, Alexander continued, watching her eyes widen. 20 hours a week, flexible hours. For Emma, that represented almost twice what she earned at the bakery. It would be enough money to get her college tuition up to date and still have a reserve for emergencies. "Why me?" she asked finally. Alexander hesitated. How to explain that he had been inspired by seeing her choose books over food? How to say that her words about education had touched something in his heart that he didn't even know existed? "Because you understand that education is not a product. It's a transformation," he said simply. And that's exactly the perspective we need. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Part of her distrusted the offer. It seemed too good to be true. Another part whispered that perhaps it was her chance to make a difference on a larger scale. "I would accept a proposal," she said. "Finally, I can work for you, but with one condition." "What?" "I want to see your company first. Understand exactly what kind of work you do. What are the values of the organization? If I'm going to help develop educational programs, I need to make sure they really will benefit the communities, not just generate profit." Alexander smiled, the first genuine expression of joy that Emma had seen on his face. "Done. How about we visit the office tomorrow morning? I can pick you up here at 9. Emma nodded, still processing the surreality of the situation. "Okay." "Great," Alexander said, extending his hand to her. "Welcome to EduTech Solutions, Emma." It was only when he mentioned the name of the company that Emma truly understood who she was talking to. EduTech Solutions was one of the largest educational technology companies in the country. And the man who drank coffee at the bakery every day was Alexander Whitmore, the billionaire CEO who occasionally appeared in business magazines. That night, Emma barely slept. On one hand, she felt an almost childlike excitement at the possibility of working on something that really mattered. On the other hand, a voice in her mind warned her about the dangers of such different worlds colliding. Alexander also spent the night awake, but for completely different reasons. For the first time in years, he had made a decision based on emotional impulse rather than rational analysis. And strangely, that left him more excited than any billion-dollar acquisition ever had. The visit to the EduTech Solutions office had exceeded all of Emma's expectations. The mirrored glass building in Midtown Manhattan housed an environment that seemed straight out of movies about technological innovation. Open spaces, meeting rooms with glass, walls, and a palpable energy of creativity and ambition. Alexander had introduced Emma to several members of the team, explaining the projects in development and how her practical experience would be essential to guide the educational programs. For 2 weeks, Emma divided her time between the bakery, college, and her new job at EduTech. She developed reports on literacy methodologies, participated in video conferences with educators from different regions of the country, and contributed insights that impressed even the most experienced executives at the company. Alexander was increasingly fascinated by the unique perspective that Emma brought. While the other consultants spoke in metrics and scalability, she spoke about human faces, about Mrs. Davis, who cried when she could read her first recipe alone, about Mr. Johnson, who could finally help his grandson with his homework. "The numbers are important," Emma said during a meeting about program expansion, "but we need to remember that behind each active user, there is a person transforming their reality. Our responsibility goes beyond delivering content. It's about creating dignity." It was on a Monday that everything fell apart. Emma was organizing her materials in the small office she had been given at EduTech when she heard loud voices coming from the meeting room next door. She immediately recognized Alexander's voice, but she had never heard him in that tone. Cold, calculating, ruthless. "The numbers from the last quarter don't lie, Marcus," Alexander was saying to someone. "We need to cut the low-profit programs and focus on the premium markets. Education for lower-income classes may be socially relevant, but it doesn't generate the return our investors expect." Emma felt her stomach clench. "But sir, the community programs have shown real impact," replied a voice she recognized as being that of Marcus, the director of social projects. Emma Collins brought impressive data about the transformation of entire communities. "Emma is a competent consultant, but she's being too romantic," Alexander retorted coldly. "Social impact is great for marketing, but at the end of the day, we're a company, not an NGO. We're going to reallocate resources from community programs to the development of educational platforms for private schools. That's where the real money is." Emma leaned against the wall, feeling as if she had been punched in the stomach. Alexander's next words were even more devastating. "As for Emma, keep her contract for another 2 months to finish the pending reports. After that, we can let her go. She served well the purpose of giving us credibility in the social market, but now we need people with a more commercial vision." Emma left the building like an automaton. She couldn't go back to the bakery or to college. She walked aimlessly through the streets of Midtown Manhattan, feeling as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. For 2 weeks, she had believed that she had finally found a place where she could make a real difference. She had worked late into the night, developing detailed proposals to bring quality education to the most needy communities. She had dreamed of programs that could change lives as hers had been changed, and she discovered that it was all just a facade. She was just a marketing piece, a way to give social credibility to the company's true commercial objectives. The next morning, Emma arrived at the bakery with eyes swollen from crying. Mr. Johnson immediately noticed that something was wrong. "Girl, what's that face? Did something happen?" Emma could only shake her head, unable to explain how she felt betrayed, used, naive. When Alexander appeared for his usual coffee, Emma could barely look at him. She prepared the order mechanically, without the cordiality she had developed in recent weeks. "Everything okay, Emma?" Alexander asked, noticing the drastic change in her behavior. She finally looked up at him, and Alexander was startled by the coldness he found there. "Everything is perfect, Mr. Whitmore," she said, emphasizing the formal address. "Your coffee is ready." Alexander frowned. "Did something happen at work? You didn't show up yesterday." "Don't worry," Emma replied with a bitter smile. "I'm sure you'll find someone with a more commercial vision to replace the romantic I am." The blood ran cold in Alexander's veins. She had heard the conversation. "Emma, you don't understand. I can explain." "You don't need to explain anything," she interrupted him. "I learned a valuable lesson about how the real world works, about how people like me are just instruments for people like you to feel better about yourselves." "That's not true." Alexander tried to defend himself, but his voice sounded weak even to himself. "Isn't it?" Emma gave a humorless laugh. "You hired me to give credibility to your social projects, made me believe that I was making a difference, and when you no longer need me, you'll discard me like a used object. Very convenient." Alexander opened his mouth to protest, but Emma continued, "You know what hurts me the most? It's not even the fact that you use me. It's that for a moment I believed that someone really valued what I have to offer, that my experience, my passion, my struggle meant something more than a marketing strategy." "Emma, please, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain, Mr. Whitmore," she said, returning to wiping the counter with jerky movements. "I'll finish the reports you hired me to do. After that, you can rest assured you'll never have to pretend to care about what a simple girl from the Bronx has to say about education again." Alexander stood still for a long moment, seeing all the respect and admiration he had built with Emma shatter before his eyes. He realized that he had lost not only a competent employee, but something much more precious, the trust of someone he had begun to admire deeply. When he finally left the bakery that morning, he took with him the bitter certainty that he had made the biggest mistake of his career, and perhaps of his life. 3 days had passed since the confrontation at the bakery, and Alexander couldn't concentrate on anything. His meetings dragged on without direction. He reviewed the same reports multiple times without absorbing the content, and for the first time in years, he deeply questioned the decisions he had made. The last straw came on a Wednesday afternoon, when Marcus knocked on his office door carrying a bulky folder. "Alexander, I need you to see this," Marcus said, clearly agitated. "It's the final reports that Emma turned in yesterday." Alexander took the folder reluctantly. He had instructed Marcus to receive the materials from Emma to avoid another awkward encounter. "Her work is even more impressive than we imagined," Marcus continued. "She didn't just document existing methodologies. She created a completely new framework for community education. Look here." Marcus opened the first report, revealing detailed diagrams, case studies, and implementation proposals that demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of both the pedagogical aspects and the economic feasibility of the programs. "She designed a model that could be financially self-sustaining in 2 years," Marcus explained, pointing to charts and projections. "Using a combination of public-private partnerships, community microfinancing, and adaptive technology. It's genius." Alexander flipped through the pages, increasingly impressed. Emma had created something that went far beyond what he had requested. It was a complete plan to revolutionize education in low-income communities, maintaining commercial viability without sacrificing social impact. "There's more," Marcus said, turning to the last section of the report. "She included a proposal for the community library she mentioned to you. But it's not just a traditional library. It's an integrated education center that could serve as a model for the entire country." Alexander stopped on the page that showed architectural blueprints, implementation timelines, and even funding strategies for Emma's library project. She had transformed her personal dream into a solid and innovative business proposal. "Marcus," Alexander said slowly, "this isn't the work of a junior consultant. This is strategic director-level work." "Exactly what I thought," Marcus agreed. "Alexander, we need to talk seriously about keeping Emma on the team. What she created here can completely transform our approach to the educational market." That same afternoon, Alexander decided to do something he hadn't done in years. He personally visited the Bronx. He wanted to better understand the world Emma came from and perhaps find a way to repair the damage he had caused. The community center where Emma taught literacy was in a simple but well-maintained building. Alexander arrived just in time for Emma's volunteer class, and through the open window, he could watch her working with a group of adults. "Mr. Thompson, remember what we talked about, how the letters are like little stories?" Emma was saying, her voice full of patience and affection. "Each word you write is telling a little piece of your life." Alexander saw an elderly man with grey hair struggling to write something on a piece of paper. When he finished, his eyes filled with tears. "I managed to write, 'Thank you, Professor Emma,'" the man said, his voice choked with emotion. Emma got up and hugged the student, also moved. "Mr. Thompson, you just gave me the most beautiful gift I could receive." Watching that scene, Alexander finally understood what he had lost. Emma was not only professionally competent, she was genuinely passionate about transforming lives, and he had treated that passion as if it were a commercial weakness. After class, Alexander waited outside until Emma came out. She stopped abruptly when she saw him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, clearly uncomfortable. "I came to understand," Alexander replied simply. "I saw your class through the window. I saw what you really do here." Emma crossed her arms defensively. And now that you've seen it, what do you think? That I'm even more naive and romantic than you imagined? I think I made the biggest mistake of my professional life, Alexander said, his voice full of sincerity. Emma, I read your reports, all of them. What you created is not only impressive, it's revolutionary. Emma frowned, not expecting this response. You not only understood what we asked for, Alexander continued, you completely reimagined how we can approach community education. Your framework could change the lives of millions of people while maintaining financial sustainability. So why did you say I was too romantic? Why did you decide to let me go? Alexander sighed deeply. Because I'm scared. Scared to admit that someone with a quarter of my experience and a fraction of my resources could have insights that I never had. Scared to recognize that my purely commercial approach was leaving out exactly what makes education truly transformative. Emma remained silent, processing his words. I have a confession to make, Alexander continued, his voice becoming more vulnerable. When I hired you, it wasn't just for your technical skills. It was because you reminded me why I got into education in the first place. Before I became obsessed with profits and expansion, I really believed that education could change the world. And you stopped believing? I didn't stop, Alexander admitted. I just buried that belief under layers of business, pragmatism, until I met you and realized that it's possible to do both things, generate real impact and maintain commercial viability. Emma studied him carefully, looking for signs of manipulation or falsehood. But there was something different about Alexander, a vulnerability she had never seen before. What are you proposing exactly, she asked finally. That you come back, not as a consultant but as director of social impact, that we work together to implement your ideas, and that we start with your community library here in the Bronx as a pilot project for the entire framework you developed. Emma felt her heart race, but forced herself to remain cautious. And if I come back, how can I be sure that you won't change your mind again when investors push for purely financial results? Alexander smiled for the first time since the conversation began. Because this time, you'll be in the room when those decisions are made. As a minority partner at EduTech Solutions, Emma's eyes widened, not believing what she had heard. Emma was silent for long minutes, processing Alexander's offer. A minority partner at EduTech Solutions. It was beyond her wildest dreams, but at the same time, it awakened in her a terror that she couldn't name. I need time to think, she said finally. Alexander nodded. Of course. But Emma, I want you to know that this offer has no expiration date, and it's not charity, it's recognition of your true worth. In the following weeks, Emma found herself torn between the opportunity of a lifetime and deep-seated fears she didn't even know existed. The possibility of working alongside Alexander, implementing her ideas on a national scale, was tempting. But there was something more complex happening in her heart, something she was desperately trying to ignore. During her months working at EduTech, Emma had begun to admire Alexander in a way that went far beyond the professional. She saw how he lit up when they discussed educational projects, how he genuinely cared about the impact of the initiatives despite the business facade. There were moments when their gazes lingered longer than necessary, conversations that extended beyond business hours, an undeniable chemistry that they both pretended not to notice. And that was exactly what scared her the most. Mom, can I ask you a question? Emma said one Sunday afternoon, while helping Mrs. Rodriguez prepare lunch in the small kitchen of the house where she had grown up. Of course, honey. You've been acting kind of strange lately. What is it? Emma hesitated. What would you do if you had the chance to change your life completely, but it meant entering a world where you weren't sure you belonged? Mrs. Rodriguez stopped peeling potatoes and looked at her daughter attentively. Does this have to do with that new job you don't want to talk too much about? Emma sighed. I received a proposal, an incredible proposal, but I'm afraid I'm not. Prepared that I'm deluding myself, that you'll get hurt, Mrs. Rodriguez finished, with the wisdom of someone who knew her daughter better than anyone. It's not just that, Mom. It's that, what if I accept and then discover that I'm not good enough? What if I fail in front of everyone? What if it works out? Mrs. Rodriguez interrupted gently. Emma, since you were little, you've always been afraid to dream too big. Remember when you wanted to go to college and kept saying it was impossible? Emma nodded, remembering the nights she cried, thinking she would never be able to afford university. But you did it. Alone, working double, but you did it. Now a bigger opportunity appears and you're afraid again. It's different, Mom. This time it's not just about me, it's about other things. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled knowingly. Now I understand. There's someone involved in this story, isn't there? Emma blushed violently. Mom, honey, your mother isn't stupid. You've been wearing that face of someone who is thinking about someone all the time, and if you're afraid to accept a professional opportunity, it can only be because there are feelings involved. That night, Emma barely slept. Mrs. Rodriguez had hit the nail on the head. She was in love with Alexander, and that complicated everything in a way she didn't know how to handle. The following Monday, Emma decided to talk to the only person who could understand her, Marcus, who had become a kind of mentor during her time at EduTech. Marcus, can I talk to you about the proposal Alexander made me? Of course, Emma. What's worrying you? Emma took a deep breath. I'm afraid I'm getting into something that's beyond my capabilities. Alexander talks about partnership, about implementing my projects nationally. But what if I can't handle the pressure? What if I disappoint everyone? Marcus observed her carefully. Emma, do you want to know what I think? I think you're afraid of the wrong thing. What do you mean? You're not afraid of failing professionally. You're afraid of falling madly in love with a man who lives in a world completely different from yours. Emma felt her blood run cold. I'm not. Emma, I've worked with Alexander for 5 years. I've never seen him behave with anyone the way he behaves with you, and you turn red every time he enters the room. Emma covered her face with her hands. Is it that obvious? To me it is, but that's not the issue. The issue is, are you going to let the fear of getting hurt emotionally stop you from realizing your professional dreams? That afternoon, Emma made the most difficult decision of her life. She called Alexander and asked to meet him at the bakery where it had all begun. Alexander, I've thought a lot about your proposal, she began as soon as he sat down. And I can't accept it. Alexander's face fell. Why? If it's a matter of percentage of the partnership, we can negotiate. It's not that, Emma interrupted him, feeling tears forming in her eyes. It's that I can't work with you. Emma, if it's because of our previous discussion, I've already apologized. I recognized my mistake. It's not because of the discussion, Emma said, her voice breaking. It's because I'm in love with you. Alexander was completely silent, his eyes widening. And I know it's crazy, Emma continued quickly. I know we're from completely different worlds. I know you probably see me only as a talented colleague, someone interesting who came from the Bronx, but I can't pretend it's just work for me anymore. Emma, let me finish, she asked, wiping away the tears. If I accept your proposal, I'll spend every day working alongside you, pretending I don't feel anything, torturing myself every time you smile at me or when we work late together. I can't do that to myself. Emma got up from the table, grabbing her bag. I'm going to finish college the way I always did, working here at the bakery. I'm going to continue my volunteer work. And who knows, maybe one day I'll be able to open my community library alone, even if it takes a few more years. Emma, wait. Alexander stood up too, but she was already heading for the door. Thank you for believing in me, Alexander. Even if it was only for a short time. It was the first time in my life that someone saw real potential in what I do. And with that, Emma left the bakery, leaving Alexander alone with the devastating realization that he had lost not only the most talented person he had ever met, but also the woman he had been hopelessly in love with since their first conversation. 3 weeks had passed since Emma rejected Alexander's proposal, and she was desperately trying to resume her previous routine. She woke up at 4 in the morning to study, worked at the bakery, attended classes at the university, and maintained her volunteer activities on weekends. But something had irreversibly changed inside her. During her months at EduTech, Emma had proven to herself that she could dream bigger. She had created projects that could impact millions of lives. She had worked at a strategic level that she never imagined being able to achieve. Returning to her previous routine felt like trying to fit into clothes that had become too small. Alexander stopped frequenting the bakery. Emma felt a pang in her chest. Every time his usual time passed without his presence, but at the same time she felt relief for not having to face those eyes that haunted her in all her dreams. It was Mr. Johnson who first noticed the change in her. "Girl, you've been looking kind of down," he commented one less busy afternoon. "That fancy customer stopped coming and you got like this. Did something happen between you two?" "Nothing happened, Mr. Johnson," Emma lied. "I'm just tired because of college." But the truth was that Emma was struggling against a deep sadness that she couldn't overcome. She had tasted a possibility of life that now seemed unattainable, and worse yet, she had fallen in love with someone who represented everything she could never have. The situation became even more complicated when Marcus appeared at the bakery one Thursday morning. "Emma, we need to talk," he said, ordering a coffee and sitting at a table in the corner. "Marcus, I already told Alexander that I don't want any more involvement with the company," Emma replied, serving the coffee with hands that trembled slightly. "I didn't come to talk about that. I came to talk about Alexander." Emma stopped, looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "He's not doing well, Emma. Since you left, he's not the same. He cancels meetings, spends hours staring at the computer screen without doing anything. And yesterday, I found him in the office at 10 at night, reading your reports for the 100th time." "That's not my problem," Emma said, but her voice came out less convincing than she intended. "Emma, you told him you were in love, but he never had a chance to respond." Emma's heart raced. "What do you mean?" "I mean that maybe you ran away before finding out if your feelings were reciprocated." Emma sat down heavily in the chair next to Marcus. "Marcus, you don't understand. Even if Alexander felt something for me, we're from completely different worlds. He's a billionaire, CEO of a gigantic company. I'm a girl from the Bronx who can barely afford college." "So what?" "What do you mean, so what?" Emma looked at him incredulously. "You think that doesn't matter? That his family, his friends, his social circle will accept a woman like me?" Marcus sighed. "Emma, can I tell you something about Alexander that you might not know?" She nodded hesitantly. "Alexander grew up rich, it's true, but he always felt like a stranger in his own world. Do you know why? Because, unlike most people in his circle, Alexander really cares about education, about social impact. He has always been seen as the romantic of the family for wanting to use the company to make a difference in the world." Emma frowned. "What I mean is that you're not as different from him as you think. You both are people who believe that education can transform lives. The only difference is that you lived that transformation firsthand, and he has always wanted to provide it for others. That doesn't change the fact that—" "Emma," Marcus interrupted her gently, "you're afraid. I understand. But letting fear stop you from fighting for what you want isn't courage, it's cowardice." These words echoed in Emma's mind throughout the rest of the day. Cowardice. Was that what she was being? She had faced all the obstacles in her life with determination, poverty, prejudice, financial difficulties. But now, faced with the possibility of love, she was running away. That night, Emma made a decision, not about accepting Alexander's professional proposal, but about facing her own fears. She needed to understand what she really felt, and more importantly, she needed to fight for her dreams, both personal and professional. The next morning, Emma asked for time off at the bakery and headed to the EduTech office. Her hands trembled as she entered the elevator, but a new determination burned in her chest. She wasn't going to run anymore. She wasn't going to let fear stop her from pursuing what she wanted. If Alexander didn't reciprocate her feelings, at least she would know that she tried. And if he did, well, then they would have to figure out together how to make two different worlds meet. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, Emma took a deep breath. It was time to stop hiding behind fear and fight for what really mattered. Alexander was in his office, just as Marcus had described, looking at the computer screen, but clearly not seeing anything. His hair was disheveled, as if he had run his hands through it several times, and there was a sadness in his eyes that Emma had never seen before. Emma knocked lightly on the glass door. When Alexander looked up and saw her, his expression went through a sequence of emotions: surprise, hope, caution. "Can I come in?" Emma asked, her voice firmer than she thought possible. Alexander nodded, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. "I came here to have a conversation that we should have had 3 weeks ago," Emma said, sitting down but keeping her posture straight. "A conversation about us." Alexander straightened in his chair, his eyes fixed on Emma, as if she were an apparition that could disappear at any moment. "Emma, Let me talk first," she interrupted him, taking a deep breath to gather courage. 3 weeks ago, I ran away from here because I was afraid. Afraid of not being good enough for this world, afraid of getting hurt, afraid of falling, in love with someone who could never love me back. Alexander opened his mouth to speak, but Emma raised her hand. "But today, I realized something. Throughout my entire life, I've faced obstacles that seemed impossible. I grew up in the Bronx. I paid for my own college. I've been working since I was 16, and even so, I never gave up on my dreams. But when it comes to you, I became a coward." "You're not a coward," Alexander said softly. "You're the bravest person I've ever met." Emma smiled sadly. "No, Alexander. True courage would be to stay here and fight for what I want instead of running away. So I came here to do exactly that." She got up and walked to the window, looking at the city below before turning back to him. "I'm in love with you," she said, her voice clear and firm. "Completely, hopelessly in love. And I know we're from different worlds. I know your family probably won't accept me. I know people will say I'm an opportunist or that you're going through a midlife crisis." Alexander stood up too, taking a step towards her. "But you know what else I know," Emma continued, her eyes shining with determination. "I know that when I'm with you, I feel like I can conquer anything. I know that you see me as I really am, not as a poor girl from the Bronx, but as someone with real value. And I know that together we can do incredible things." "Emma, I'm not finished yet," she said, moving closer to him. "I accept your proposal. I want to be your partner at EduTech. I want to implement our educational projects. I want to build my community library and use it as a model for the entire country. But there's one condition." Alexander smiled for the first time in weeks. "What?" Emma took another step, standing inches from him. "I want to do all of this as your companion, in every sense of the word." For a moment that seemed eternal, they looked at each other. Then Alexander reached out and gently touched Emma's face. "Emma Collins, you just said exactly what I was trying to find the courage to say for months." "What?" "That I'm hopelessly in love with you. Since that first conversation about Paulo Freire. Since I saw you choose a book over food. Since I realized that you understand education in a way that I never could, despite all my experience." Emma felt tears of happiness forming in her eyes. "Do you want to know why I cancelled all my meetings in recent weeks?" Alexander continued, his hands now holding her face. "Because I realized that all the success in the world means nothing if I don't have someone special to share it with. And you, Emma, are the most special person I've ever met." Without another word, Alexander leaned in and kissed Emma. It was a kiss full of promises, of shared dreams, of a future that neither of them had dared to imagine alone. When they parted, Emma laughed through tears. "So is it official? We're partners in everything." "Completely official," Alexander replied, spinning her in the air. "Minority partner at EduTech Solutions, future director of the first integrated community library in the Bronx, and if you accept, future wife of a CEO who finally understood that true success is measured in lives transformed, not in profits." Emma's eyes widened. "Alexander Whitmore, are you proposing to me?" "I'm asking you to build a life with me. A life where we can transform the world through education, where we can prove that true love overcomes any social difference, where your dreams and mine can come true together." "Yes," Emma said without hesitation. "Yes to everything." A year later, the Emma Collins Community Library was inaugurated in the Bronx. The modern and welcoming space housed not only thousands of books, but also classrooms, computer labs, and literacy programs that had already served hundreds of people. On the day of the inauguration, Mr. Thompson was a special guest. He stepped onto the small stage set up in the center of the library and with an emotional voice read a text that he had written especially for the occasion. "This library represents more than books and knowledge. It represents hope. It represents proof that dreams can come true when we find people who believe in us." In the audience, Emma and Alexander looked at each other, their hands intertwined, knowing that they had found not only love, but also the purpose that would give meaning to the rest of their lives together. The small bookshelf of used books from the bakery where it all began now had a special place in the new library, with a plaque that read, "Where great dreams begin with small choices." Dear listeners, we hope that Emma Collins' story has touched your hearts as much as it has touched ours. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about love, overcoming challenges, and transformation. You can find it by clicking on the link to the left. If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity of life, the power of love, and the strength of dreams. Don't miss our upcoming content and tell us in the comments what was the moment in Emma's story that moved you the most. We'll see you there.